Howdy folks, Kris here at Shuksan Vans, and I want to thank you for the purchase of our roof rack. Today we're going to do a video on the Ascend series, but it's really the same, very minor differences. We will point those out between our Basecamp, our Ascend, or our Summit series. The installation principles are the same. It's really, the difference comes into the front fairing, and we will talk about that throughout this video. We're going to do some setup right in the front end here at the workbench and make life a little easier once you get up on top of the van or get next to the van. Let's jump to the table and get started. Okay, we're here at the bench. I want to point out some of the parts and talk about the tools that you're going to need. You're going to need to supply a couple of wrenches or a wrench, a crescent wrench or a 7/16 box wrench or a 7/16 socket, a 3/4 inch box wrench or a 3/4 inch socket. You need to provide those. We provide the Allen wrenches. A 5/16 you'll use a couple of times. The 5/32, do not lose that. That is your best friend, that is your companion. So keep a close eye on it because you're going to use that. That's used on all of the holes throughout the roof rack, on every part of it except the 2 bolts. So don't lose that guy. Pucks. The one thing that we want to mention, it says up. There's a sticker on that. Make sure it's facing up. That's it. You are going to get a bunch of bags of fasteners, and we will have these all clearly noted, the quantities, what's included in that, and you're going to have a couple of spares of each size in case you lose one, in case you find that there's a thread that's boogered up or you happen to booger up a thread on it, you've got a spare there. Some of the common parts, crossbars. You're going to have a bunch of these. That's kind of unique to us. We include a bunch of those. We want it to be easy and functional for you. That is the rear roller. We love this design. We have included it in our different roof racks that we built over the years. Helps loading up water toys, lumber, all of that. So that goes in the back of the van. Just in front of that will be the rear fairing. Here we have a passenger side rear side rail. And you'll note that it has the stainless badge on it. That goes towards the back of the van. This is the passenger side rail. This is for the Basecamp or the Ascend series. If you have a Summit series, it's going to be slightly larger, a little bit different profile. That's because it has more lights in it. One thing to mention is this foot. This foot has to face the center of the van. If it doesn't, if you put it face out, the crossbars won't fit in between here. So again, foot has to go towards the center of the van. And lastly, on the bench here is the Ascend series fairing. The Basecamp is the same thing minus the lights. Now, if you have a Summit series, you're going to have 11 lights in there, excuse me. And we're going to do an instructional video on how to put this together, the Basecamp or the Summit series. We'll do that next. Okay, let's get to that. Here we are still at the bench, but we're talking about fairings now. We got the Basecamp fairing, no lights. The Ascend series, 6 lights. And the Summit series, 11 lights. We're going to talk about how they go together, what parts go with each one of them, and the slight differences between them. Now, to bring this a little bit closer so you guys can see this, these two are identical minus the lights in this one. When we go to put these together, obviously we've already done that trying to make this a little bit quicker and easier for you guys. What this takes is a 1/2 inch bolt, a 1/2 inch or the 1/4 inch washer, dab of Loctite through the top bolts here. And this is really the assembly of the extrusion, the support to the fairing itself when you get this. We take this, there's a little dimpled part on the back of the nut, and that goes towards the back of the fairing. We're going to thread this on by hand, just a thread or 2. Now, I've obviously gone through and done all of that, but I just want to show you how this will go together. Slide that on there. Simple as that. Flush this out on the end. Go through, tighten that up, and then do the rest of the tightening. One thing to mention here, again, Basecamp and the Ascend series, these 2 flat surfaces face each other. The radiuses go out. Now, trying to make this as quick as possible, we're talking about the lights for the Ascend series and the Summit series. They're identical. You're going to get a light, and you're going to do the assembly of this. You're going to get 2 of these little brackets that we make. you're also going to have a bag of hardware, and this is, again, clearly noted, it's all together. You're gonna have a bracket, a bolt, and a little washer. The bolt goes through the little washer, and there's a little part, a nut that I forgot to tell you about. That nut has a nylock insert in there. When you hold this light, you're gonna drop, the nylock is facing the center of the light. This gets dropped into that little channel just like that. Now, another thing to mention here, we're gonna put these on here and we're not gonna tighten these down until that's the last part of this assembly. This angle is similar to this. You don't want this turned around like 180. Oops, drop the nut out of there. You don't want this back, you want this almost parallel to the front, and you'll see why in just a moment. I guess you can see just on that assembly there. Get that nut back in there. On here, we've got the bracket, we've got the washer and the bolt. They're gonna go through that part there, through the bracket, through that hole. And again, we're not tightening this down all the way. We're just getting close to where it's there's some resistance in it. Again, we're pretty close to parallel to that, not quite. Now, 1/2-inch bolt, a washer, a dab of Loctite on there, insert that there, bolt, washer, dab of Loctite through that hole. Now, when we go to feed this in here, the angled part, the wider part goes towards the bottom of the fairing. Tip this up a little. I tend to hold the bolts in place, and this comes and drops into here, and then you're keeping a hold on the bolts there, and you slide those on just like that. Put a nut on so that doesn't fall out. Put the nut on so this doesn't fall out. And in this case, I'm going to use a socket because it's a little bit easier to hold on to this. We're going to tighten this up. Now you have to do this before you tighten the brackets up to the light. And I'll show you why in just a second. Okay, that's good. Last phase for this little part. Same wrench, 5/32 that you've been using, came in the kit. On here, you can see that this will move. When you're done, you want this to be resting in the furthest position down towards the bottom of the fairing, and it stops there. In order to find that, you're going to lightly tighten up the left side as you're facing the assembly from the back, the left side. Lightly tighten that up, and then go to the right side of it. And this is with, when I say the right side, this castled look is the top of the fairing. The right bolt, you can now snug that up. And what that does is it tends to spin the light into its mounting position all the way down there. Then you can go to the left side and check that and snug that one down. There you go. As a final check, you want to look through and see that this plane, that these are all on the same plane. You don't have one that's tipped up a bunch. That's it, outside of the wiring part of it. Now, the Summit series is almost the same with one little minor difference, and I'm going to show you that now. On the Summit series, you have all of these lights in here. You've got one extrusion up on the top as the stiffener. This formed part makes the bottom of it very strong and stiff. This is the one difference. These little brackets, you're going to do a 1/2-inch bolt, washer, dab of Loctite into this bracket, and this faces out. These fall in line with this plane right here. So sometimes we'll take a block of wood, or you can eye it up there, tighten it down. Once it's up in place, then you can tighten both of those down completely. Everything will square up when it's in the assembly with the rest of the roof rack. As for the lights, we leave that up to you because everyone has their own preference. And what I mean by that is some folks might want to have the option to have ambers only on, white only on, or the whole thing lit. Some might have top row, bottom row. I mean, the sky's the limit when it comes to this. So we leave that up to you. a controller is certainly a nice thing. Oxbeam is one, they're relatively affordable. There's a couple of other brands of them. They allow you to make strobe functions and all kinds of things. Yes, they're more timely to install or take more time to install, but they sure offer you a lot of options. And again, can give you amber only, white only, all on. Might look into that, but again, that's why we leave that up to you, because everyone has their personal preference. Well, I think we are moving on to the side rails and the pucks and all of that. So let's jump to that now. Before you get started, we wanted to show you, for the visual learners, I'm one of those people, I like to know my options. And we have multiple options like elevation for the roof rack, the crossbars, and the decking. And for those that like the basket style, that would look like this. And for those that are looking for more of a flush mount style, that would look like this. And with this, you could do actually a mix and match. If you wanted the back half to be up, great. The front could be lower. Really up to you, but these are some decisions you're gonna wanna make before you get started. Okay, we're back at it. Up on the ladder, as you can see, you're probably wondering what this purple ugly yoga mat's doing here. That's just to protect the front of the band. If you don't have an ugly purple yoga mat, you could use a moving blanket, some towels, a piece of cardboard, whatever you can use to protect the front. I would put something there, because that front fairing can be just heavy enough and just awkward enough that you don't want to drop and dent up the front of the rig. This is the part where we've slid the roof rail pucks into the roof rail. And again, we mentioned earlier, there's a little sticker that says up. We'll show you that now so you get a sense of what that looks like. And that, of course, aligns with these two holes. So this is the first part where we're gonna set this down on the roof rail. We're going to get our stainless hardware. This is the only place that we use stainless hardware. Well, it's all stainless, but this happens to be bright stainless. It's a 3/4 inch bolt. There's a lock washer and then a flat washer. It goes in that orientation. Bolt, lock washer, flat washer. We're gonna feed that down through roof rail into, oh, it slid back a little bit. There we go. And again, just thumb tight. I do have my tool that we mentioned earlier. That's my best friend for this whole project. These we're just gonna do thumb tight, because we need to have some movement in the whole system until we get everything together. It might want to bind up in places if we tighten these down hard. Okay, I'm going to take the time to go through and put the rest of these in. I don't want to bore you with those details, but we'll be back with you in just a minute once that's wrapped up. One thing that I wanted to mention, if you don't have factory roof rails that came in the van, if you have an aftermarket roof rail, you're not likely going to have this black puck that's at the end of the factory roof rail, or that post that I mentioned earlier. So you need a distance as to how far this sets back. It's 8.5 inches, 8.5 inches from the center of the body line right here. There's a caulk line that joins the two sections of body together. 8.5 inches from there back to the front edge, the leading edge of the foot or the puck. They're the same distance there, 8.5 inches. Okay, we got the other side of the roof rack on. So we are at a point where we're gonna start putting the crossbars in. A couple things to mention. I've got a piece of cardboard here, and that's just to help us when we go to, if you're working solo like I am, you wanna be able to put the crossbar on something and not lay it right on the roof. You could use a towel, you could use an old blanket. Piece of cardboard works pretty well, and it's just to prop it up to get a little bit of elevation there when these slide into place. I'm gonna set that there for now. I wanna point out something. We used all the stainless hardware to secure the sides of the roof rack to the roof rail. We're now moving on to the 1 inch long black oxide stainless steel fasteners. And in this setup, there is no lock washer. It's a black bolt and just a flat washer. Now to keep these secure and in place, we send out a tube of this thread locker. You just need a drop on each one of these. This is a big bottle that we keep around here at the shop. Just a drop, and that's it. And that's just to keep this from backing out. So, got one set up. I use this cardboard in case it drips on the top of the van. Another little drop there, and that's good. So I typically will take that bolt, put the start of it on the Allen wrench there, and we look through the hole, and we line up the 2 threaded holes in there. And in this part, we want to just get a couple of threads in there. We don't need to tighten it down. We don't want to tighten it down. And same thing again there. Okay, that one's secure. Okay, now that we have this first crossbar loosely installed, again, just a few threads of the bolts in there on each side, we're gonna set this into place. And this is when that towel, piece of cardboard, purple, ugly yoga mat comes in handy. So this is where it gets a little tricky because of the weight of it. And again, I have that piece of cardboard that I've been using. So if we set this in place, and it's a good idea to have some fasteners queued up with a little Loctite on them. And you're gonna line that hole up there. Okay, all we need to do is get a few threads in there. By hand is enough just to secure it. So we can get both sides started. Okay, there we go. Now with that, if you have a few threads on the top and the bottom one, this is, generally speaking, going to be enough to keep it in place. You want to make sure that you got at least a couple of threads, that way it doesn't want to come out of there when you come around to the other side to get those 2 in. You don't want to tighten any of those down all the way right now, because as we tighten these down, it really starts to pinch the roof rack together, and it makes it difficult to get the other crossbars in here. And as a result of having it too tight, you're going to scratch up the inside of the roof rack. Okay, I'm going to hop around that side. I'm going to secure those, and then I'm going to start moving through the crossbars all the way to the end of these sides, and we'll be back with you in just a minute. Okay, this is a little assembly section of the roof that we have brought down to the bench here. We've done most of the assembly on the front part of the roof rack. This is easier, we find, to do on the bench. And this assembly is for the area next to the fan, next to the vent area there. If we don't have crossbars there, it forces the person to step approximately 24 to 30 inches. And that's a kind of a big step to land on these little 2-inch crossbars. So we've gone through the trouble to source the right lengths of crossbars. This goes fore and aft, this goes side to side. There's a couple of things to mention that we really are really critical here. This bar here has 2 smooth sides and 2 T-track sides, 2 T-slot sides. One of the smooth sides goes towards the roof of the van. One of the track sides goes up, and I'll explain why we have that. It might be obvious at this point. This assembly is going to tie to this track, which you can see we already have the T-nuts in there. There's 6 of them in there. This track is facing up, so if you want to buy a decking kit from us, or if you want to do your own decking kit, you have a way to mechanically fasten the decking to that. One other thing to mention, when we buy these, we have one end of these tapped. So it works just as the crossbars do and ties to the side rails of the roof rack. That tap set of ends, the holes, has to be away from this bar. And again, that's gonna work just like the other crossbars. So as we come in here, we'll explain the orientation here of everything. We have 12 fasteners total. We have 12 T-nuts total. We've slid the 6 T-nuts into, not on this side, but you can see them there. They're already inside of that. And then there are T-nuts on the sides of both of those. One other thing to mention, this is really critical. You cannot use a washer on these, and that's because there's not enough space to have 2 fasteners with washers in this bolt, in this bracket, excuse me. It just physically will not go together. There's not enough space in there. So no washers in the setup, but make sure that you use your Loctite in there, because we want to make sure these don't back out. There's nothing to keep those from moving. I will do one quick setup just so you guys understand how this goes together. Right now, we don't know they're approximately 10 inches apart, the crossbars on the roof rack. But we don't have any markings on here. So what we do is we get these in here, loosely tied together, not so loose that the track will slide off or fall apart, but loose enough that we can quickly make some adjustments once we get up on top of the van. And what I mean by that is just snug these down so that doesn't want to move. That's kind of one assembly. So you're going to do the same thing on that bracket. These brackets connect with those T-nuts, and then these come together just like that. And once it's done, and again, we're loosely snugged down, we'll bring this assembly, we'll get back up on the side of the van and get that installed. Okay, once again, back up on the side of the van on the ladder, we have the assembly that we put together. For visual reference, you see how we start to fill in the side of the deck, and now that makes it easier to walk around that area rather than making these big wide strides from here to here without it. So that's why we went through the trouble of putting this all together. One thing to mention, you're going to need a T-nut in this track on the vertical side right there and right here. I've already put them in, but you got to have 2 of them in there, and that's for these parts right here. Now, when we're on the bench, I suggested that you tighten this down, and that's only because we don't want this to slide out or this to slide out while you're getting up on the van and have this slide and potentially damage the side of the van. So at this point, I have to loosely, just slightly loosen these up. Because it goes without saying, I suppose, the spacing on this is really critical, so it lines up from here to there. So I get this close, and I can see already I'm going to have to slide this down just a little bit. Didn't loosen that up quite enough. There we go. Okay, so probably caught that. I had a washer on that fastener. Again, with these, they take no washer on it. It's just the bolt without the washer in the bracket area. This can be a little bit trickier where we have to try to line this up. Okay, those 2 are in. I'm going to loosen this side as well, just so we can move this around. We're going to tip this up, and we're going to take, oops, a fastener. Again, Loctite on all of these. We're going to have these line up just like that. One more, just like that. Now this has to be pretty close. And same thing for this guy. Oops. Obviously, once you get one in, it makes the other one a lot easier to line up there. So, we've got all the fasteners in their locations. The critical part here, to make sure that these are square instead of, at an angle, got everything loosely in place. We're going to tighten down these 2 here. And as you saw, if I were to try to pull that to the side, you'll see what happens as I tighten this down. It pulls it perpendicular to this plane. Okay, now that we've got these 4 fasteners snugged up, and these are perpendicular to this plane here, we're going to move out here, and we're not going to start with those because these crossbars aren't snugged down. We're going to get these tightened first. We want to make sure that in this scenario, we have, and I'm loosening these up just to make sure that they're not fighting each other. Okay, that still moves. So in this case, we want to take this bracket and we want to push it firmly against this surface and this surface, and then lightly snug those down. Okay. Okay, that one's done. Let's check this here. That one's loose. That one's loose. Okay, again, we're going to shove that bracket firmly in the corner, snug that one down, and we're going to come back and we're going to, tighten these down a bit more. But right now, we're just trying to get all of these surfaces mated together nice and snugly here. We're going to move over and do the same thing on this one, and this goes pretty quickly here. There. 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 And there. Okay, those are firm enough to keep it in place. This is the point where you're going to want to start fastening, like snugging down all of these fasteners on the outside. And typically I would just start at the front and check this one, and then you don't need to be ham-fisted. You don't have to like really crush this. You want to get them nice and snug, but you don't want to get them so snug that you're going to strip out the bolt head there. You're going to work through this sequentially, front to back on the side rail. You are not going to tighten down the fasteners that go into the pucks yet. That's a later stage that we'll come back and we'll do that. You also want, once you have all of these fasteners done on the outside of the roof rack, I want you to go back and check tightness on all of those. And sometimes like this one here, I can physically see it sitting, the tolerances are, just loose enough. So you can physically see that this one's sitting a little bit below it. So I'll make the adjustment and then I'll tighten that one up and make sure that that stays in place. And then that way this surface is nice and smooth. Make sure that those are good and snug. Again, don't ham fist it. You don't need to like try to break it. You'll end up stripping the head out. Do all of that. And then you're going to do this process, the installation of this little T-bar section on that side, on the passenger side. While you're over there, you're going to do that exact process. Snug down the outside, go back, make sure that those are all snug. And at that point, the installation of the front half of the roof rack is done. To make this video a little bit shorter, we have gone about putting the back half together, but we wanted to just touch base on a couple of things in the process. First thing you're going to do is put the side rail in with the bright stainless fasteners into each location. You're going to do one side and then jump over to the other. The next thing you're going to do is start at the front. It's where the front half of the roof rack and the back half of the roof rack meet. This crossbar ties the two together, whether it's in the lower orientation or the upper orientation. From there, you're going to start putting in the crossbars all the way to the back. The one thing to mention here in the back is that the last crossbar, you want to put the threads in on each side, but just a few threads in. You don't want to tighten it down because we're going to put the roller in there and you need to have enough room for the roller to slide in between it, and we're using the pressure, the tension on it to capture that pole, the roller, so you don't have to hold it. Okay, we're at the point where we're going to put the bearing and the 1/2-inch bolt together, the assembly. It goes into the side of the roof rack. We've got one assembled there already. We'll get a closer view so you guys can get a first-hand look here, what this is going to be like. Okay, we're at the part where we're going to put the bearing into the side rails, and this is what the part will look like, this little assembly. There's 3 parts. We've got the nut, the bearing, and the bolt. There's a flange here, and that has to go inside the side rail up against it. So here we put the bolt through. Again, the flange towards the inside there. And then the nut. And then on here, that 5/16 that we've talked about that came in the kit. And then the 3/4 inch box wrench or socket. Snug that up, and there you go. And then there's the bearing that we'll use for the rear roller. Okay, we're at the point where we're going to install the rear roller. One thing to mention here is that this crossbar is put into place with just a few threads tightened into the crossbar. We don't want that completely snug, because when you install this, we don't want you to drop this, but at the same time, we can't have this tightened down so much because it won't fit in between the bearings that we just installed. So we've done that on that side, we've done it on this side. There's just a few threads tightened into the crossbar. We're gonna take the tube here, and we're gonna slide it onto that bearing, and it's a reasonably snug fit. At this time, you're gonna have to flex this out just a little bit to get it to go on there and capture it. Now, in the event that you can't flex this out enough, you may have to loosen the threads on this last crossbar a little bit to open it up, but you don't want to have it so much that that falls down. Again, just 1 or 2 threads, 3 threads into the crossbar. At this point, we're set here. We're ready for the last crossbar to go in here and the rear fairing. Once we do that and we snug all of this up, that will bring tension onto the rear roller and it'll stay in place. Okay, we are at the rear fairing assembly part of this. You're gonna have 1 crossbar, the rear fairing, and in this case, I've already preloaded them. We have the T-nuts, we have a bolt, a washer, and a T-nut. And again, you're gonna put a little dab of Loctite that you have started this whole process with on each fastener. I've already done that in this case, you'll thread them in there. You're gonna loosely put the T-nut on there, and that's because we get them all in here, and then we can slide this into this track. Ooh. Of course, this is the one that I just tightened down there. And when we get to this, we need to just flush out the end and make sure that it's not past hanging over a bit, because obviously it wouldn't fit within the rack there. So I flush it up, and you're going to use either your 5/32 Allen wrench or your impact gun. Go through, tighten them up, and we're good. Now that we have all of the fasteners tightened down, we're at the part where we're going to put these little brackets into the back of the fairing, and this secures the lower part to the roof rack. This requires a 1/2-inch fastener, a washer that goes through the hole, and then into this bracket right here. These only have to be hand tight at the moment, because if they're off an angle at all, I'm exaggerating for reference purposes, but if they're off, it won't go in there. So we just lightly snug them down, and then once this goes through the roof rack, then you'll go back and tighten up both in the roof rack assembly when it's finally, all put together. Okay, we're to a part where it can be a little bit awkward if you're working by yourself. I'll show you can do it on your own. If you have a second set of hands, that will really help. I have a tire carrier on this rig so I can stand on it. If you don't, you end up having to reach out a little bit, and that leverage makes it a little difficult. So I will put down, say, a piece of cardboard like this or a towel, just so this is elevated and protects the vehicle. So in this case, I'll try to do this without standing on the tire carrier so you have a better understanding. So I'll lean out here and then slide this down into place, and then it'll sit on that cardboard long enough for me to get these 2 fasteners in these holes. There we go. And we're looking for just a few threads just to get us started and stabilize it. Okay, there's the 2 fasteners in the crossbar, and then we have the 1/2-inch fastener. Again, those are shorter than what goes in the crossbars. This will thread through this side hole here and into that little bracket that we installed just a minute ago. Okay, that lined up. So that's it for this side, outside of having to finally, do the final tightening. I'll hop over there, pull the ladder over, set up, get those 3 fasteners done, and at that point, I'll snug that down, and that's the final assembly on the rear half. The roller is tightened up. This is all tightened up. You'll want to make sure that the roller is sitting on the bearing and not drop down in there. If it's binding at all, that's likely the case. Once I pull these, tighten these up, this is gonna pull this assembly tight together. This won't move back and forth anymore. Well, we are really close, I promise. We wrapped up the rear end of this thing, the roller and all of that. We have got 2 final steps to do here if you don't have the decking option. You're gonna make 2 more trips around the van. The first trip around the van is to tighten all of the fasteners that go through the side rails to the crossbars. You're gonna start at one end. I'm over here on the driver's side in the back. I'm gonna start here and I'm gonna tighten down all the bolts on that side. I'm gonna jump to the passenger side and I'm gonna come down that and make sure all of those are nice and snug. Once that's complete, I'm going to then go to the roof and tighten down all of these the stainless fasteners that tie the roof rail and roof rack system, the roof rack system to the roof rail, where those roof rail pucks are. There's 2 in each one. I'm gonna go from this one to that one systematically and go through and make sure that all of those are snug. And again, that's 1 more final trip and then we're wrapped up. If you have the decking option, we're gonna go to that process next. For those of you that have gone with the decking option from us, we want to show you how it looks when it's installed and how easy it is. They're secured down with 1/2-inch fasteners, the black with a washer, and again, a little bit of the Loctite on there. We put a roll-in, or they call them a roll-in T-nut or a drop-in T-nut, and there's a round bottom on them with a little ball. The ball faces down and the flat top faces up, and you literally just drop them in and roll it to the side. So, as simple as that. In this panel, there's 8 of them, so you just need to drop in 8 T-nuts on that, or 4 on this side, 4 on that side, and then put your nut and washer down in there. And you don't want to tighten down any of them until all 8 bolts are in place. Once that's done, then you can secure it down. You're going to count out the number of holes that you have and put the corresponding T-nuts in there, go around, insert all the fasteners into those, and away you go. You will sometimes have to do a little bit of line up here because, let me give you an example. If you put this T-nut over here, you're not going to see it, so you have to kind of line it up this way. There's one there. That's a little bit of elongated slot so you can see it. Might have to do that the same way. So sometimes you have to move this back and forth just a little bit, but it's not hard. You'll see how quickly and easily it comes together. Okay, you're at your final stages. Good luck. If you guys have questions or comments, please let us know. Otherwise, thank you so much for your business. We really appreciate it, and go enjoy this thing.